Okay, ethics students, this is the second of the video lectures on Kant. So with the first one, we talked about the idea that he stresses about acting with a good will, meaning acting solely out of duty to the moral law. He thinks of goodwill as being the only thing that's intrinsically good. Anything else could be used for evil, but as long as a person is acting with a good will, he thinks there's no chance that the person will ever do anything immoral or unethical. He illustrates what it means to act solely out of duty to the moral law with a candy store owner example. Um, right? If you have a candy store owner who rips a customer off, they're clearly violating the moral law, so they're not acting solely out of duty to it, that's for sure. But the key is probably the difference between number two and number three, where the second candy store owner doesn't rip the kid off. He gives him $20 worth of candy for $20 or whatever. But he does it because he's afraid people are going to find out. And from Kant's point of view, he doesn't get any moral credit. He didn't do anything morally wrong, but he doesn't get any credit either. As opposed to the third candy store owner who doesn't rip the kid off because he thinks it's wrong to rip people off. Um, and so he's acting out of principle, he's acting out of duty, and so he would get moral credit. You could also illustrate the difference between acting just in accordance with the moral law versus truly acting solely out of duty to it. If you think about the example of jumping into a river to save someone who's drowning, a person who does it for a possible reward uh, would be acting simply in accordance with the moral law and wouldn't get any moral credit for it, versus jumping in the river to save somebody's life out of the principle that that's the right thing to do. Intuitively, it seems like that makes sense, that that should deserve moral credit, but not doing it for the reward. But having said that we're supposed to act out of duty to the moral law, the big question then for Kant is, what is the moral law? And that is the categorical imperative, this universal statement that always tells us what we ought to do, what we're morally obligated to do. Kant's clear that the categorical imperative has nothing to do with happiness, it has nothing to do with consequences. So even if the candy store owner who overcharges the kid takes that money and donates it to cancer from cancer research, from Kant's point of view, that wouldn't make any difference. Just the fact that he overcharged the kid means he's violated the moral law. But again, what is the moral law? So it's a categorical imperative, this universal statement that tells us how we should live, how we should act. Kant has two versions of it. Only treat people as an ends, never as a means, so you never just use someone. Um, but then the other version is you should ask, can you imagine a world in which everyone is acting as I am now? Kant thinks this is a purely logical test. Uh, can such a world even be imagined? So in the case of killing someone, you can't universalize that because if everyone killed all the time, everybody would be dead. Um, and so he would have rules against killing, rules against lying, rules against stealing. If this sounds to you like something fairly close to a traditional Judeo-Christian ethic, think about the Ten Commandments. This is no coincidence. Kant was given a very strict religious upbringing, and I don't think he ever completely threw it off. I think what he's trying to do, in a sense, is give a philosophical underpinning, a philosophical foundation for the traditional rules of a Judeo-Christian ethic. Um, anyway, so we should talk about some of the problems with formalism in general and with Kant in particular. So the course pack does a good job of talking about some criticisms. You can read about them in chapter 2 of the course pack. One criticism, of course, that gets launched against any kind of formalist perspective is that by emphasizing moral rules and moral rights and not allowing consequences in, that's a flaw with a formalist approach, that they ignore consequences. Utilitarians like Bentham and Mill, of course, would make this criticism. And there's a kind of a cliched famous example that can kind of illustrate this. If it's 1940s Germany and a Jewish family comes to my home and asks me to help them, and I say sure, and I put them in my attic and I bring them food and water and take care of them, and then one day a Nazi soldier comes knocking on my door and asks if I know the whereabouts of any Jewish people. Well, from Kant's perspective, right, I'm not supposed to lie. Lying is intrinsically wrong. He's got a moral rule against it. So, from Kant's perspective, I'm not allowed to lie. Now, I could stand there and be silent, or I could change the subject. But of course, in the real world, all that means is the soldier would come barreling into my house, find the family that I'm helping, and then probably throw them and me into a concentration camp. From a utilitarian perspective, you should lie, right? Of course you should lie. No, I don't know the whereabouts of any Jewish people. But from Kant's perspective as a formalist, right, lying is intrinsically immoral. You're never supposed to do it. Um, a second criticism that gets launched against uh, Kant and really any formalist perspective is that if we characterize morality by a series of rules, inevitably there's going to come situations where those moral rules come into conflict with each other. And then what am I supposed to do? Because no matter what I do, I'll break a rule. And I think the previous example can illustrate this problem as well. So suppose I have a moral rule that says save human life whenever you can. That seems like might be a sound moral principle. But then I also have another principle against lying. Well, what if a situation comes up where the only way where I could save human life is by telling a lie? Notice that no matter what I do, I end up violating a moral rule. So it seems inevitable that if we characterize morality by moral rules and rights, that there are going to be situations that come up in life where no matter what I do, I'm going to have to violate a moral rule. And then there's a problem with Kant's categorical imperative just in itself. Kant says you should identify, describe the action that you're thinking of taking, and then ask, could it be raised to the level of a universal law? In other words, can I imagine a world where everyone is acting in this way? Um, it's not clear exactly how this is supposed to work. Some people think that the categorical imperative, as Kant has put it, is too vague to be useful, that we could never actually use it in real life situations. So let's suppose I'm at home and someone breaks into my house and they have a gun or something and they're clearly going to start shooting at myself and my family. But I also have a gun and I'm contemplating whether I should kill this person before they kill me and my family. Well, Kant says I should act only in such a way as can be raised to the level of a universal law. Well, notice that whether I should do anything here, whether I should kill this guy or not before he kills me and my family, probably depends on how I describe the action. If I describe it as I'm killing this guy, well, Kant would have a rule against killing because killing can't be universalized. But what if I describe my action not just as killing, but what if I describe it as killing in self-defense? Well, can I imagine a world where every time someone's life got threatened by someone else, they killed in self-defense? Well, sure, you can imagine that world. Um, and so under that circumstance, with that description, it would seem to be okay for me to shoot this guy. Or another example to illustrate the same problem. Suppose a woman's pregnant, and let's suppose that she gets told by her doctor that there are terrible complications, um, and that if she tries to carry through with the pregnancy, she would likely die. This is a rare circumstance, but it does happen. So if she thinks of the action that she's contemplating as having an abortion, well, Kant would clearly be against it because the categorical imperative would say, can you imagine a world where every time a woman got pregnant, she had an abortion? And the answer is no, because there wouldn't be any more people, there wouldn't be any more women, and there wouldn't be any more abortions. So it seems like Kant would have to have a rule against it. On the other hand, somebody might say, well, no, this isn't just any old abortion. We should more describe it as having an abortion to save the life of the mother. Well, can you imagine a world where every time a woman's life was threatened by the pregnancy, she aborted the pregnancy? Yeah, you can imagine that. In fact, we probably live in a world very close to that. Um, so now the question of whether or not the categorical imperative would allow the action depends on how you describe it. And Kant is not clear how you go about doing that. Is it an abortion or is it an abortion to save the life of the mother? So these are some criticisms that get raised against Kant specifically and against formalism in general.